Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the National Association for Fixed Annuities presentation of What You Don't Know About Retirement Will Hurt You, featuring Mark McGrath, the co-founder of Jester Financial Technology. My name is Scott Hines. I serve as the Membership and Development Director here at NAFA. And before we get started, I'd like to cover a few quick housekeeping items. To begin with, this webinar is being recorded for use by our supporting partner members who could not attend today, and for our premier partners who wish to provide it as a resource to their own annuity professionals. You must be a member of NAFA to access the replay at nafa.com. If you're an annuity professional and still not a NAFA member, go to nafa.com/membership and click Become a Supporting Partner. By doing so, you'll be able to access this and previous webinar recordings, as well as an entire collection of tailored resources to support your practice. Being a NAFA member also happens to be a fantastic, if not the best way to show your support for fixed annuities. We've worked to secure many strategic relationships, including Jester Financial, and a new agent and agency E&O program with NAFA for our members. So do the right thing for your practice and your clients, and join NAFA today if you're not already a member. During today's webinar, we're going to invite you to ask questions using the Q&A panel of your GoToMeeting client. You can also tweet your questions at NAFA USA is the NAFA Twitter handle. If you happen to be mobile, using hashtag NAFA Webinar, which is all one word, although the Q&A panel is probably the best way. Questions will be addressed at the end of today's webinar, and time permitting. With questions that are not covered, if we get an abundance of questions, we'll answer those via email to all attendees. I want to make sure we send out a special thanks to Insurance Insight Group, who are providing the platform for today's webinar, the NAFA Education Committee, who have developed this year's webinar curriculum, and of course during National Retirement Planning Week, we want to make sure we thank the National Retirement Planning Coalition and the members of that coalition who have pushed this webinar's information out to their members. So, with that being said, I'd like to move on to introduce the man who will have the lead role in today's webinar, Dan McGrath. Dan is the country's leading expert on how rising costs associated with healthcare will impact retirement, Social Security, and the overall economy. Jester Financial provides tools and education for clients to help determine their expected costs for healthcare and retirement. And as I mentioned, they're a new NAFA partner. In a previous life, as we say, Dan was a senior VP of regional sales for a small RIA in Boston, where he was able to accumulate nearly $1 billion assets under management annually. As a sidebar to myself, I wrote, maybe not so small. He's also a best-selling author of What You Don't Know About Retirement Will Hurt You, the title of today's webinar, and he is currently writing What You Don't Know About Obamacare Will Hurt You. He can be heard as the host of Nashua, New Hampshire's Eyes and Ears Wide Open, and when he's not traveling, he's enjoying the outdoors of New Hampshire with his wife and 4 children. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for joining us today, and without any further ado, Dan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Today, as Scott pointed out, we'll be discussing what you don't know about retirement. And as Scott touched on, I happen to be one of the country's leading experts on how the cost of healthcare will impact people in retirement, also their financial plans, and how we can help solve that. Just for a little bit of a background on how I became the expert, it's not anything of my own volition. It's not of my sheer brilliance. My family will point that out, that I'm not a brilliant human being. It all came down to, as Scott mentioned again, that my background was a former money management wholesaler or vice president of sales, traveling the country and giving people financial advice on how to plan for retirement and how to invest. And when my mother, who turned 65 years of age, had a couple questions a few years ago, I actually blew her off and stated, that's not what I do. I help people plan for retirement. That's healthcare. That I could care less. A couple months later, unfortunately, my mother received an infection in her gum line. She needed to have some teeth pulled. Lo and behold, wound up at the dentist. My sister, who's a home health nurse aide that goes into people's houses and gives people care that is needed, was also there at the dentist office. The dentist had come out and said, each tooth pulled, your mother needs 4 pulled, it's going to be about $3,000 a tooth. Now, my mother didn't have the $12,000 that was going to be needed for the tooth. In her checking account, we'd have to pull some money out, which led into more problems as I will go down. And then my sister had asked a simple question about, well, Mom, you had insurance through my father was a prison guard, had some insurance through my father, but she'd let that lapse. And my sister had just asked a simple question of, didn't you speak to anybody before retiring about this? And my mother said, well, I spoke to your brother, and he does do retirement, but he doesn't do this. So I didn't know who to talk to. And my sister turned to me and said, point blank, what do you think retirement is? Do you think it's going out to dinner every single night? Do you think it's playing golf every single day? What do you think happens to people when they're 80, 85, 90? Their greatest asset, believe it or not, is their health. And what I found out is also their greatest expense is also their health. And without their health, they can't do retirement. So what I've done is gone ahead and looked at all the information and found all the nuances of what is our healthcare system, especially for seniors. So today what I'd like to do is go over the agenda of, go over the facts of retirement, show you, some information you probably already know that the industry is doing a very good job at showing people, showing you or going over the changes that unfortunately Congress and our legislators have made to retirement, and they've been extremely clear on these changes. Then discuss, is this just a passing fad? We keep hearing about healthcare every single day, have it be through the Affordable Care Act, have it being changes to Medicare or Medicaid. Every single day, clients are hearing healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. And I'm going to show you, is this just a passing fad? Believe it or not, as Scott mentioned, Jester Financial, what we do is we help financial professionals calculate the costs of this healthcare for their clients. We're going to show you what to expect for these particular costs, show you how that's going to impact them in retirement. And then before we even get to the solution, you'll probably already see the solution as we're through it. So with that, I would ask Scott to just hit forward. And the first facts that everybody seems to already know is we know that there are 76 million baby boomers. But when I'm presenting especially to the general public for advisors, what I ask the general public, the question is, well, how many people are in the next generation? And usually through the audience, there's not much reaction because not many people know about it because the media is not talking about it. And as we go further, I will explain that there are less people in the next generation by a significant number, which we'll get to, and that is leading into a lot of our problems. We know that there are 10,000 people retiring each day until 2029. That's the last year when the baby boomers reach 65. And they're holding about $18 trillion in retirement assets. And I lead that as a question of, surprisingly, how much is in our deficit. And you're going to see a couple things on how we can say that our Social Security system is going to be fine and how our deficit will be paid down. So next slide, Seth. So what we know from Genworth on their future of retirement income study, and just by speaking to our clients, we know the common goals of retirees are always to retire as scheduled. Everybody has a plan or a thought on when they want to retire. They want to expect, or they expect to see a decrease in expenses, and everybody's trying to accumulate enough assets to retire. And what we found out, as we can see from the next slide, less than half of the people that have planned on retiring have actually retired when planned. And a lot of that has to do with the economy. A lot of that has to do with how corporations are unfortunately laying people off. So people are not actually retiring as planned. They're, believe it or not, retiring a lot earlier, or they're retiring a lot later than planned to try to maximize that Social Security, to try to save a little bit more before retirement. And you'll find out that maximizing Social Security is extremely important. Helping clients plan for their Social Security has never been more urgent than now, and I'll explain a little bit. We've also realized that expenses are not remaining the same. They've actually increased. I mean, not decreasing, but they've either remained the same or increased. And we know that roughly 88% could not meet those higher living expenses. And one of the big shockers that people are starting to realize, as we can see from the next slide, is the difference in what they're expecting and what they're getting all comes down to, believe it or not, healthcare. Unfortunately, there isn't that many people planning for healthcare at all. But what we do know, as we can see from a study done by Nationwide on our next slide, 97% of those that are retired or 65 and older are enrolled in Medicare. And what's happening is we're not having the conversation as financial professionals about this particular cost, and we should be, because, Scott, if you go to the next slide, please. We will see that the largest cost that people over the age of 60 are going to experience is going to be their health care. As we can see, healthcare is going to be making up roughly 33% of all their costs. Why there are no two other healthcare costs, no two other expenses that we help our clients plan for that are going to match it. Even leisure and recreation of going on travel and their housing is not going to be more than their healthcare. And the reason being is, as my sister pointed out in that beginning of the conversation, what do you think people do when they're 80, 85, 90 years old? Do you think they're going on vacation? Do you think they're getting on a plane and going backpacking across Europe? The answer is no. The answer is they're going to have higher and higher expenses because their health is deteriorating. It's just the way it's coming with the prescription drugs and the advances in technology. People are living longer, and there's a consequence for living longer. They're going to have higher healthcare costs. Plus, they're not going to travel as much. One of the things that I like to point out to people when we're doing seminars is something as simple as when you maybe had sprained an ankle. Did you want to go out and actually go for a hike? The answer is clearly no. When you have the flu or congestion, do you want to get on a plane? The answer is usually no. So what we're actually seeing is, as we're talking about retirement, especially retirement awareness, we know the largest expense is healthcare in retirement, and we know 97% of the people are actually being impacted by this expense. They have this expense. And what's frightening is we can see from the next slide, and the simple question that I ask, how many firms in the United States are helping people plan for this cost? I know there's no reaction here there's no response as we're doing a webinar, but the simple question I ask, who is helping people plan for this? Is there anybody out there that's helping anybody plan for this? We know that Fidelity has a number that they talk about. I'd written a couple articles on Producers Web that explain that the number may be slightly off, but hey, at least they're talking about it. And we also have another firm, Nationwide, that's designed some software. Thankfully, I got an opportunity to help write a little bit of that content. But they've also developed some software that shows that. And then we at Jester Financial have created the software as well. But besides that, who's actually helping people plan for this cost? And from the next slide, we know how many people have actually planned for it. According to a Sun Life Flying Blind survey, less than 8% of the U.S. population has ever factored in any type of healthcare cost into their financial plan. The largest expense that people are going to face, one that everyone basically is going to have, and I'll get there further, less than 8% of the U.S. population has ever factored into. It is the greatest marketing niche the financial industry has ever experienced. And as you're going to see, the solution is what is on our shelves today, because we have these what's called changes. Next slide, please, Scott. And these changes towards retirement, as we can just skim over this one to the next slide, is, as I explained, is why there's 97% of the people that are in Medicare. It's sort of an outlier stat, and what we found is, well, Medicare is mandatory. You cannot collect your Social Security check unless you receive Medicare. Think of that. You have a mandatory guaranteed expense in retirement, and I will ask the question, I will keep asking the question over and over again. Who is helping you plan for this? More importantly, who is helping your clients plan for this? And we already know the answer. It's the largest expense that is mandatory that people are going to have. If you don't take it, you can't collect your Social Security check. If you are 62 years old and you decide to take your Social Security check, and then at 65 and you no longer have any credible health insurance, and you still choose not to take Medicare, the IRS comes in and claws back every penny they ever paid to you for Social Security. It is a law on the books that you have to have this particular expense. And this dates back to 1993 under the Program Operations Manual of Social Security. So this has been a law on the books for over 20 years, and it was challenged, as we can see from the next slide. A gentleman by the name of Brian Hall had sued Medicare at the time, the Department of Health and Human Services, or the Secretary is Kathy Sebelius. So he had sued Kathy Sebelius starting in February of 2008 and wanted to basically be able to collect his Social Security check and not have to enroll into Medicare. And unfortunately, what the ruling of the court was, well, in order to basically be entitled to your Social Security check, you have to enroll into Medicare Part A. And once you enroll into Medicare Part A and no longer have credible health insurance that's recognized by Medicare services, well, your late enrollment penalties for Part B and Part D happen. And what we also know, because of these late enrollment penalties and because of Medicare Part A, the long-term care insurance that we have our clients purchasing, well, long-term care can't be used in a facility unless you have health insurance, because the facility is only helping you do your daily requirements of bathing, putting on your pants, eating. It's not giving you the prescription drugs you need. It's not helping you if you fall down and get hurt. So you still have to have that health insurance in order to get into the facility. And this is what Mr. Hall was trying to sue Social Security and Medicare for, and unfortunately he lost. And one of the reasons why we're so adamant, or he was so adamant about not also wanting Medicare, as we can see from the next slide, Medicare is means tested, meaning what it's going to do is it's going to take a look at how much income you are earning, figuring out how much income you have, and then applying a fee on top of what you're actually earning. So is Medicare cheaper for people under self-employed people or people working for an employer? Yes, in some cases, in most cases. But for those that are earning too much income in retirement, unfortunately, Medicare is going to be more expensive than what you could get in the private market. And Medicare has been means tested since 2003 under the Medicare Modernization Act, and then again it was made even deeper under the Affordable Care Act, where Part D was also impacted. And as we can see the charts today from the next slide, the current brackets today, if a person, an individual is earning under $85,000 a year, or a couple's earning under $170,000, there is no penalty. But if they're earning $1 over $85,000, as you can see, the Part B penalty is 40%, and the Part D penalty is an extra $12.10 a month. And that also goes up to its 220% and $69.30. That is this year in 2014. In 2007, when the information was gathered, and Kaiser Family Foundation wrote a nice little report about this, in 2007, this impacted about 5% of all retirees. By 2012, this is now impacting anywhere between 8 and 11% of retirees. Unfortunately, under the presidential budget of 2014 on page 38, there is language that talks about either changing these brackets or making these brackets remain stagnant until 25% of all retirees are impacted by this particular means testing. Now, from that particular, next slide, please. And from that particular budget, along with legislation that's been placed by the House Ways and Means Committee, and also legislation that's been placed, I'm sorry, can you go back one, Scott? Thank you. By the House Ways and Committee and by the Bipartisan Policy Center, as you can see, the projected means tested proposed brackets in 2016 are going to change. So the income is no longer going to be $85,000 in 2016. It could quite possibly be $60,000. For a couple, it's going to be, instead of $170,000, it's going to be $90,000. That's an 11% decrease for an individual and a 47% decrease for a couple. By the way, if you look at the first penalty is no longer 40%, it's 60%, as the penalties are projected to go up by 50%. Part D is right now going to remain the same as the donut hole closes in 2020, That'll be another issue that we have to deal with. The reason why 2016 becomes relevant and why it also should be a talking point with clients, it's the first year that the baby boomers turn 70 and a half. So as they turn 70 and a half, the start of our largest section of our population is going to have to take money out of their savings account or out of their retirement accounts. And by the way, that's income, which we'll get to in a second. So not only do you have the largest expense that clients are going to face, it's mandatory, and it's also means tested. I'm going to ask the next question. Is there anybody out there having or helping people plan for this? And we already know that the answer to that is less than 8% of the U.S. population is even planning for it. And the reason why they need to, on top of it being mandatory and unfortunately being means tested, as we can see from the next slide, it's deducted automatically from Social Security benefits. So what people think they're going to be receiving from Social Security is not what they're going to get. Because unfortunately, their Part B premiums, and if they so choose, the Part D premiums, along with any of those surcharges, are going to be automatically deducted from their income or from their benefit. They are going to need, as I put down in red, they are going to need another form of income in the future. It's going to have to be guaranteed. It cannot stagnate. It cannot fluctuate with the market. They're going to need some form of help because unfortunately, as I will show you in a few slides from here, their Social Security check is either going to remain the same. It may possibly, well, hopefully it'll go up a little bit. It may remain the same, or it will start decreasing. And in certain cases, for certain affluent people, it may vanish altogether. Because what's happening is their Social Security's cost of living adjustment is only projected to inflate by 2.8% in the future, while unfortunately, we know that Social Security is Medicare is inflating at a much higher rate. And the importance of Social Security, as we can see from the next slide, is large, as we know that 9 out of 10 retirees are receiving Social Security benefits. Now think of this, as we can see from the chart. More than half to almost 3/4, well, more than half of married and 3/4 of unmarried are receiving half of their income from Social Security. Think of the enormity, or think of the marketing niche that we have right now as an industry. You have the largest segment of the population heading towards retirement. They have an expense that is mandatory that no one is focusing in on. Less than 8% have ever even thought of it. This is one of the greatest opportunities that we have as an industry to get in front of people and actually help them solve a problem. And how we're going to solve that is through the products that we have on today's shelves. If we go to the next slide, and the reason why the products work is because we know what the fourth rule is going to be. The fourth rule is the definition of income. And by definition through Social Security, I mean it is your adjusted gross income plus any tax-exempt interest or everything on lines 38 and 8B of the IRS 1040. So when I explain this to the general public in seminars, I throw up an example, as we can see from the next slide, because they don't understand what lines 38 and 8B are. The examples are your Social Security, any wage, any pension or rental income, any capital gain. The sale of your home will become a factor if you, as an individual, make more than $250,000, or as a couple you make over $500,000 as a gain in your home. All dividends, including the muni bond dividends. We've all heard about the Medicare 3.8 tax on investment income over $250,000. I know a couple mutual fund companies, one specifically in the Baltimore area, is talking very loudly about this and stating, well, what you need to do is place all of your investments to avoid this 3.8% tax. Place your investments in muni bonds, and it's not recognized by the IRS. Well, unfortunately, what they don't know about retirement and what is going to hurt their clients is the dividend counts as income in the eyes of Medicare. So that income is automatically going to project them into a higher Medicare healthcare bracket, and unfortunately what's going to end up happening is they're going to lose their Social Security check, i.e. when you hear political pundits talk about the general public wants to give the government more of their money, they're not lying. Other forms of income that they count, certain annuities, all withdrawals from any 401k, 403b, 457, SEP IRA, and traditional IRAs. What is not income, as we can see from the next slide, Roth accounts, Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, health savings accounts. Unfortunately, under the medical loss ratio that's been set up by the Affordable Care Act, these may go away, as we cannot project what the benefit is to the insured. 401h plans, any withdrawal from a 401h plan is exempt from not only the IRS but also from Medicare. 401h plans are just a complement to any cash balance plan or money purchasing plan, where you can place up to $250,000 of your retirement assets into this particular plan. These are fantastic for the simple fact that you can take money out of them as long as it's used for health care for you, your spouse, or any dependent. It can be taken out tax-free and penalty-free. So for those of you that may have parents that haven't planned for long-term care, if, God forbid, they need long-term care and they become dependent on you, you can take money out of this 401h and help your parents. Unfortunately, under a 401h plan, they cannot be discriminatory. So under a group plan, if someone decides to put 10% into their 401h account, everyone in the company has to put 10% into their 401h. So it's not very suitable for large companies, but it is a fantastic option when speaking to a sole proprietor like a dentist or a law office. Specific annuities. Annuities are one of the most fantastic options for people that are over the age of 55, 56, a little later, to use to fund their health care, because they're going to have what's called the tax exclusion ratio that's from the income that's being generated from those particular annuities. Plus, they also have the ability to have a rider tacked on to long-term care as well. It is absolutely fantastic vehicle that we should be talking to every single day. And for some reason, some financial pundits that are on television and on the radio are telling people not to buy annuities. Where else is someone going to be able to generate income that they're going to so desperately need in retirement because they're not working? Have some form of exclusion ratio where there's going to be a large majority of that income not taxed and also not recognized by Medicare, and then also have the ability to possibly put on a long-term care rider for the protection later on. Where is it? What mutual fund can do that? I don't know which one. I don't know which asset manager can do that as well. That leads us also to home equity. The equity out of a home, taking it in the form of a home equity line or a reverse mortgage, a fantastic way of generating income. And lastly, certain types of life insurance. As everyone in the conference may know, life insurance, you can take a loan out from that cash value and it does not count. Once again, you have the financial pundits telling people that life insurance is bad, that they should be investing into the market. Well, really, can anyone tell me which particular investment vehicle is going to be able to grow tax-free? I can take the money out tax-free, possibly. I can possibly get a guaranteed rate of return. I can get long-term care coverage on top of that. God forbid if I pass away, my family's protected. I've created this pool of money that I can use at any time I want. Oh, and by the way, it doesn't count as taxable income. And hey, guess what? It just saved my Social Security check and helped me control my health care costs in retirement. Can anyone name the investments that I can buy off of Wall Street and get that? And unfortunately, the general public is being told day in and day out not to buy these products, not to look at annuities, not to look at life insurance, not to look at home equity lines or taking equity out of the home. Once again, as I stated, the largest expense that people are going to face, guaranteed that they're going to have it. It's means tested, and they're looking at your financial plan to determine how much income you're earning. It's deducted directly out of your Social Security check. Less than 8% of the U.S. population is ever factored into this cost. And as we go to the next slide, as we talk about, is this just a passing fad? Will this go away? One of the key slides that I like to show is just a little breakup of a woman explaining to her husband that Lawrence Welk was just not a passing fad and that music was changing. And as we can see changes from our next slide, the changes that we're seeing as a country, when I talked a little bit about the demographics of our country, what you're seeing here is the birth rate chart of the United States from 1946 to 1994. In red are the baby boomers. In blue is Generation X, and in Y the millennials or Generation Y. As you can see, we're going to have a major problem. The baby boomers total about 76 to 78 million people. Generation X is only anywhere between 58 and 62 million people. It is the first time in U.S. history that there are going to be less people in the next generation than the one that was preceding it. So when you hear about how are we going to be able to fund Social Security, how are we going to be able to fund Medicare, what's going to happen to the country as the baby boomers start to retire, we don't have enough people behind them earning the same amount of money. Yes, the millennials are about 70 million people, but they're not earning the same wages that the baby boomers are earning, or even what Generation X is earning. Where is the government going to receive their tax revenue? Well, should we be frightened? And as I stated earlier, I wrote an article and placed it on Producer's Web of, is Social Security really going broke? What we can see from the next slide is in 2007, the Congressional Budget Office came out with this particular report, showing us the impact of what Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the U.S. budget is going to have on the overall economy for the United States. Hopefully everyone can see something that's maybe a little bit odd. The first thing is, as the baby boomers start to retire in the mid-2020s to 2030, Medicare opens up like a funnel and takes off and is going to be a huge expense. But what happens to Social Security in the total U.S. budget? They level off. Now, one of the reasons why they may be leveling off, and I have not spoken to the CBO and gotten any answers to the specifics, but one of the reasons why it may be leveling off is 2007 just happened to be the first year that Medicare was means tested. Could just happen to be that they know that the Social Security amount that they're going to have to pay out, from what people are being told today, even by the financial professionals, showing them from the calculators, Mr. and Mrs. Client, this is what you're going to receive for income. You're going to receive X, Y, Z, but no one's talking to them about your Medicare costs that are automatically deducted from their Social Security check. No one is. And what's happening, or what's projected to happen, is unfortunately Medicare is going to eat a large chunk of that out. So Social Security and the budget from the surcharges for people that are going to be hit in that 25% bracket are going to unfortunately help offset the liability of the budget and Social Security. And now the simple question is going to be, well, how much is healthcare going to be? And what we like to say on the next slide at Jester Financial, believe it or not, calculating your costs are as simple as 1, 2, 3. All we need to know really is your age, your retirement age, your residency, and where you live. It's really that simple. Because what we know from what the government provides us, and I tell everyone that I can, the government is telling the general public exactly what's going to happen. They're not hiding any of this. There's plenty of literature out there that explains that Medicare is mandatory, that it's means tested, that it comes directly out of your Social Security check, and what they define as income. They're also showing you what Medicare is going to inflate at, because what we know, as we can see from the next slide from the Medicare Board of Trustees report, since 1967, we know that Medicare is inflated at a rate of 7.856%. When it first came out, it was $3 a month in 1967. Now today, we know it's 104.90. That's roughly a 7.8% rate of inflation rate. We also know what it's projected to be going into the future, because Medicare gives us the rates through 2022. We know what's going to happen 8 years from now. Now, unfortunately, when you do read the report, it does talk about how the 2 midnight rule, which you may have started hearing in the news, what that's going to do. It's hopefully going to offset some of the costs that Medicare is going to have to pay, but the problem is it's going to put a lot more costs onto the general public. And that was a Brian Williams segment when NBC talked about observation versus inpatient. So what they're projected to be is roughly 6% going forward through 2022. Medicare Part D, which doesn't have that long of a track record since it was created in 2003 under the Medicare Modernization Act, Well, it's projected to be 7.155% through 2021. We know that a Medigap policy, on average, just by talking to Weiss Ratings, is going to be 177 for a man. I mean, for a woman, and 181 for a man. And we know the inflation rate from the Department of Health and Human Services is expected to be between 4 and 6%. So now we know what the costs are going to be. So by looking at the next slide, we know how simplistic this is. If we take, and I happen to live in New Hampshire, and I do travel as much as I possibly can. If we take a look at a healthy 55-year-old couple that wants to retire at the age of 65, or they're going to be going on to Medicare at the age of 65, I tackle that in my next book, What You Don't Know About the Affordable Care Act Will Hurt You. If they earn under the Medicare average and they plan to age 85, just at a 5% inflation rate, we're going to be more aggressive in retirement instead of more conservative, and we're going to use a lower inflation rate. We know that this couple in New Hampshire is going to pay roughly $21,000 a year for their health care, or for a total amount of money throughout the course of those 20 years, $418,000 just for Medicare Part B, Part D premiums and a Medigap policy. They haven't gone to a doctor, they haven't taken a pill, they haven't gone to the dentist, they haven't seen a podiatrist. $418,000. If they happen to earn that $1 too much, if we look at the next slide, they're going to pay an extra $7,000, or a total of $557,000. If they earn the maximum amount of money, they're going to be paying a total of $835,000 just for premiums. And once again, what are we using for income? That income is their financial plan. That income is Wall Street telling them, put as much money as you possibly can into a traditional IRA and into your 401k. And what is going to happen is they're going to have all of this tax-deferred money, and then when they turn 70 and a half, the government tells them they have to take it out. Think of how many people are going to be hitting these particular brackets. Where are they headed? We have $18 trillion sitting in retirement accounts. It's all there waiting. And what is, once again, I'm going to hammer home, what is the solution? The solutions are the annuities, are the life insurance products that we have. And why it's important is, as we can see, these numbers are huge. Everyone's going to say, well, I can't pay that. Really? You can't pay that? Well, if we look at the next slide, remember, it's deducted out of your Social Security check. So if we look at Social Security, we know they're taking out Part B premiums and Part D premiums. We know that they're taking all surcharges as well. And as I'd mentioned, Social Security's COLA is only expected to be 2.8% going forward for the foreseeable future. That's according to the Social Security Board of Trustees report. And as we know, 2014, it was only 1.5%, where it was projected to be 1.9. So it's already coming in lower than what the Social Security Board of Trustees is actually telling us. So that impact, what we can see on the next slide, is if we take a 65-year-old person today, mass market, if they're earning roughly $11,000, $15,000 from Social Security, which is what is average. If we just take the average information from Social Security, in blue we can see what we're telling the clients they're going to be receiving from Social Security. In red, we're showing them what their Medicare costs are going to be. And in gray, that's their actual take-home. And what we're seeing is that Medicare is going to eat away, their health care costs are going to eat away their take-home Social Security check. Now, for those of you that may know a little bit about Medicare, you've heard about what's called the Hold Harmless Act. The Hold Harmless Act only helps people, and what the Hold Harmless Act means is your Medicare Part B premiums can only be increased by the amount of your cost of living adjustment by Medicare. So if your cost of living adjustment, or your COLA from Social Security, I mean, the COLA from Social Security is only 1%, and you're going to make an extra $10 a month. Medicare Part B premiums can only go up as much as $10 a month. But unfortunately, what the Hold Harmless Act doesn't keep people held harmless from is Medicare Part D. That can go up as much as it wants. By the way, for anybody that hits any of these income brackets, unfortunately, once you hit an income bracket, you're making too much money in the eyes of Medicare, the Hold Harmless Act is now null and void. It doesn't exist. So now think of that. You now know the government has told you with the Hold Harmless Act and how it's going to impact you. it's going to eat away your cost of living adjustment. The general public that so desperately needs the Social Security check, that 53% of married people and the 74% of unmarried people, they so desperately need this income, we're going to show them that their COLA adjustment is unfortunately going to most likely be eaten up by their health care costs. And it's a simple question as talking to somebody in the general public, is health care a major topic that we're hearing from people today? I'm thinking everyone's going to agree when they turn on the news and every single day they talk about the Affordable Care Act. Where do you think costs are going to be? They're going to say, of course, they're going up. Well, unfortunately, your income from Social Security may also not be going up. But what we have to do is generate another form of income for you that's guaranteed. Once again, I'm going to hammer home, everyone needs to have an annuity. Everyone needs to have life insurance. And now talking about the importance of maximizing Social Security. Even for somebody that is earning the maximum amount of Social Security, as we can see from the next slide, they're still going to feel the effects of Medicare. Granted, Social Security doesn't go down, their Social Security take-home doesn't go down, and it does actually increase. They're still not receiving the amount that they believe they're receiving. So as you can see, by the end of life, at the age of 85, 90 years old, you can see the gap. When they can't go back to work and they can't generate more income, they're going to be seeing their Social Security check becoming less and less and less. But if someone's earning the maximum amount of Social Security, it means they've earned the most amount of money. And if they earn the most amount of money, they probably invested the way Wall Street asked them to invest. And as we can see from the next slide, if they're in the largest bracket, well, unfortunately, the income still remains the same with Social Security, but as you can see, those surcharges are going higher. You're starting to see that their Social Security check is going to go down and decrease, and they won't be saved or they won't be held harmless. Their Social Security check is going to vanish. And once again, we know that, thank you to the federal government, that they expect to have 25% of all retirees impacted by this. It's clear as day in the 2014 presidential budget. So if we take a look at the next slide, we know that the power of income, well, is going to be large. We're going to see retirees that are never going to see their Social Security benefit increase. Possibly they're going to lose their entire Social Security benefit. For some of those that didn't happen to earn a lot or earn the maximum amount of Social Security income they could be awarded, but they invested a lot, or they had a pension and they didn't put a lot in their Social Security, but they worked at Social Security through odd jobs. They're going to see their Social Security basically possibly going away. There are going to be some people today that I work with that have to write a check to the federal government for what Social Security doesn't cover for their Medicare premiums. And then on top of it, they're going to be taxed on the income they never receive. So ultimately, from the next slide, and I'll stick here for a little bit, the more healthcare costs you have, the less Social Security. So is it any shock when the CBO came out in 2007 under that report and showed you how Medicare and Medicaid were going to open up like a funnel, but Social Security flatlined? Even though we have people in the media screaming, even in the financial industry, that Social Security is going bust. I will argue that it's not going bust. It's just a question of knowing about the one mandatory health care cost. And no one is talking about it, which leads us to the next slide, which I talk about as the opportunity. As I keep hammering home about the opportunity, and I keep recapping, as we can see from the next slide, we have a mandatory expense. It's called your health care. Less than 8% have ever factored it in. I can't hammer home enough that it's determined by income, and your income is pretty much everything. These costs are going to be deducted directly out of their Social Security check, just the premiums. There's still going to be those out-of-pocket costs of going to the dentist, going to get their eye exams or their glasses. There's still going to be expenses to going to have their feet checked through the podiatrist. So their Social Security check has to be managed. People have to be speaking with the financial advisor, and they have to have a plan on how they're going to take Social Security. And think of how many people are doing that. 10,000 people a day, which is going to be happening for the next 15 years. So what can we do today that makes everything a little bit easier, as we can see from the next slide? It's time to now create both a financial plan and a distribution plan, understanding the power of income. And once again, I'm going to hammer home the products that are on the shelf today, those annuities, that insurance policy. And one of the other easy solutions is being able to speak to an employer, showing them the problem, saying one of the easiest solutions is just to have the Roth 401k provision tapped into the retirement. And I'll just quickly go through the other slides, as I know it's getting late. So one of the things I post up or show to the general public is it's as simple as the hub of a wheel. In order for the car to go around or the bike to go around, you need a hub on the wheel, and the hub is financial planning. That is the financial advisor. You do need, as much as I may state annuity life insurance, you still need some form of money that's going to be liquid and is going to stay in front of inflation. So you do have to have your assets managed. You need insurance. You need guaranteed income. Without speaking about long-term care in any financial plan, that financial plan is still null and void if you need it. And someone has to help you manage Social Security. The opportunity is there for all to have. As we take a look at the next slide, please. Because the biggest factor people are going to have is their health. And as my sister pointed out, it's no longer just their largest expense, it's their greatest asset. And I'll leave the question with, how are you helping your clients protect theirs? So with that, I'll turn it back over to Scott, and I would like to thank everybody for their time.
Thank you, Dan. And before, we're going to, just so everyone knows, hang out on the line. We're about 45 minutes into the presentation. We're going to get to the questions very shortly. We're going to take this quick 2-3 minute break to go through a few NAFA slides. But in so doing, please direct your attention to the question and answer panel of your GoToWebinar screen if you'd like to ask a question for today's presenter, Dan McGrath of Jester. So let's see here. NAFA is the authority on fixed annuities. And that is referenced in our numerous consumer-friendly pieces that you're able to share with your clients as part of National Retirement Planning Week here. These are some client-facing pieces that you can share with your clients as a NAFA member. Our Premier Partners can get access to these and brand these for their members as well. You can also visit fixedannuityfacts.org and direct your clients there. There's information about the guarantee funds and other great information for your clients. Lastly, we wanted to take a moment to announce that coming this June, NAFA is pleased to introduce National Annuity Awareness Month. Again, coming this June, NAFA and our partners are currently putting together great content for this first of its kind event. And again, you can see some information there on the slides. We're going to put together webinars. We'll have some collateral, social media, and so forth. But this June will be National Annuity Awareness Month. So, that being said, again, this webinar is being recorded. I've gotten a couple questions, as we always expect, so NAFA members will be able to access today's webinar through NAFA.com, or our Premier Partner members that choose to host it on their own location. I know Jester is planning to host this presentation as well. And with that being said, we do have a few questions, Dan, in about 10 minutes or so. So I'm going to get started, if that's all right.
Sure, please.
Okay. The first one that came in, and I had to paraphrase it here, so I'll do my best, but just be aware these are coming from our attendees. So I'm trying to take their meaning as they come in throughout the presentation. This one came in early on. And this one goes as follows. Healthcare is often a difficult topic to bring up with clients. It's not a topic we avoid, but they often don't want to discuss it or even acknowledge it. Do you have any thought-provoking or discussion prompting questions that you might suggest to help us get started getting our clients to face this fact?
Well, for the advisors that we work with, it's a great question, and the advisors that we work with, we've tackled it. So there are a few ways that we've tackled this, and instead of starting the conversation, I always work with the advisors by saying, well, what is your elevator pitch? And when you go through their elevator pitch and I say, well, how about this one? When someone says, well, what do you do? Well, we focus in on, what the name of your firm, we focus in on making sure that people or ensuring people are going to receive the Social Security amount that they're going to receive in retirement, depending on who they're talking to. We help them mitigate their tax obligation, and we help them control the cost of their health in retirement. What tends to happen once you make that third comment, people say, well, how can I control my costs? Well, then it's very simple did you know, believe it or not, you have a mandatory expense in retirement. People will say, well, what do you mean I have a mandatory expense? Well, in order to receive Social Security, you have to have Medicare, which isn't free. Have you planned for this? And then from there, the conversation of planning for health care is not that difficult, I would like to think. And I can go deeper, but I know there's probably a few other questions, so I don't want to take all the time.
There are, and certainly we can revisit that towards the end as well, or if you like, we can send further information to the attendees. Let's see, another one that came in, it was around the time we were talking about the required minimum distributions, talking about what does this kind of information do. A lot of folks, of course, are encouraging their clients to delay as long as possible.
Delay.
But with delay taking the distributions, delay
Sure.
taking a piece of their retirement. So what does this conversation in your presentation, how does this potentially change that in terms of making sure that it's more evenly allocated from the original point of the retirement?
There was an article written, and I may be a little long-winded, and I apologize. There was an article written in Market Watch by a gentleman named Jack Tater, who I work with. And the article was, Your Financial Advisor May Hate Your Wife. And we talk about the distribution, and in the book, the chapter is titled To Have and to Hold, and it talks about how today's financial thought process is actually hurting women, because we're taught to delay as much as we possibly can those tax-deferred accounts and use everything else because you don't want to pay the tax man. So what ends up happening is as you go through the cash, the investments, the Roth IRA, we're told to buy term and not buy life insurance. We're told not to take the equity out of the home. Unfortunately, what happens with a couple, the man tends to pass away first, and what ends up happening is the female tends to take care of the male. So by the time the male passes away, the female's health is deteriorated. They've burned through all the liquidity, all the easy assets. She still has the housing bill because they never got rid of the house. She didn't receive any any life insurance from his passing. And then what ends up happening is the Social Security gets cut in a third because he has passed away and she takes the higher of the two. But she still has all the bills. So what she does is she starts taking money out of those tax-deferred accounts, and guess what the government says? Well, we're going to tax you with that by the IRS. Oh, and by the way, that's considered to be income as well. So we're going to actually start taking more money out of your Social Security check. So what ends up happening to the woman, because she deferred that money as long as she possibly could, is she's using more of that towards the end of her life because of her health care. And then what ends up happening is she runs out of money, and she has to basically give her home or any asset away to the government so she can get on Medicaid and get moved to a nursing home. And unfortunately, under Medicaid law, they can move her within a 50 to about 100-mile radius, depending on the state. So that's why when you go into a nursing home, which I tend to go because it's part of my career, when you go into a nursing home, you see mainly women. You don't see many visitors because the visitors, not that they don't care about her, well, she's just been moved away. That's what's happening to this tax deferred. And what I show people is the simple solution is instead of deferring as much as possible, it is very easy to solve this problem. All the issues that I just sent to everyone, this is how simple it is when I sit down with couples. Buy a little bit of life insurance, $100,000, $250,000, put a long-term care rider on it. When you turn 59 and a half, start using your tax-deferred money first. Delay your Social Security as long as possible using the tax-deferred money. Grow your cash, grow your Roth IRA, grow your investments. When you're turning 65 or when you're going into retirement, look at taking some of those cash investments and turning that into an annuity that has a high tax exclusion ratio plus also long-term care. So when the male does get sick, what happens? The long-term care kicks in so she can hire somebody to help him. When he passes away, there'll be some life insurance for her. She's going to lose a third of her Social Security check, but she still has the income from the annuity. So now when she gets sick, guess what her decision becomes? It's not about giving my house away so I can get on Medicaid and move away from my family. I have long-term care through my annuity. I have long-term care through my life insurance. I have my cash. I have my investments, and I've burned through the account that's actually going to increase my health care costs. That's gone and off the table. She now has freedom and decisions to be made. And I argue in my book and in that article, that's too difficult to sell to women. So I'm sorry I may have gone on a soapbox and a little long-winded, but that's what I talk about, the delay of the tax-deferred accounts.
Absolutely, Dan. And I've got a number of other questions, but I'm going to ask one, and then I got a message from our Director of Operations, Janet Turpinning, who's on the line. Have her jump in after this one here. But a number of attendees, as you can probably guess, without getting into specific carrier products, but a number of attendees are asking which types of annuities are those specific, or are those certain annuities, on your view, that are exempt compared to which types are not?
Once again, I'm Jester Financial, so I'm the guy that's just showing you what the costs are going to be. And as you can see from my contact info, it's all there. I'm also on the radio talking about this. I tell people it's fixed annuities. They can have a long-term care rider. There are some variables that are good. I'm not going to go carrier specific, but I do know there's some variable out there. But the SPIAs are absolutely fantastic because the tax exclusion ratio is anywhere between 60 to 80%. Doesn't matter who you're talking to. Now it's just a question of speaking to the carrier and finding out what that exclusion ratio is.
Dan, I have a question for you. Where do you expect to see the inflation rates for Medicare heading?
Well, as you can see with the older part of our segment of the population getting, they're starting to use it more and more, and as we can see, the Affordable Care Act kicking in as well. And the Affordable Care Act has nothing to do with maintaining the inflation rate at all. But unfortunately, what's happened under what's called this 2 midnight rule, which means in order to go into a hospital and have Medicare work or Medicare cover your insurance, you have to be admitted as an inpatient. Well, if they don't see anything medically necessarily wrong with you, meaning you're not bleeding, you're not having a heart attack or a stroke, you just feel pain, and they can't see why, you're admitted under what's called observation. And this is where Brian Williams of NBC did an amazing piece on it. And unfortunately, what they left out is that this information isn't new, it's actually really old. So what ends up happening is, in order for you to move from observation to inpatient, you have to spend 2 nights in a facility. Well, after the second night, if they still don't find anything that's medically wrong with you, Medicare takes all of the bill and puts it on your lap. It won't accept it. Now, couple that with how now this is where the Affordable Care Act did stick its nose into our business, is it's telling care providers that you can't readmit somebody for the same problem within 30 days, or that's Medicare fraud. So when we talk about the inflation rate, what ends up happening is, let's say I go in with chest pain, but they don't see that it's a heart attack, but they put me down for a heart attack, and it ultimately wasn't medically necessary. Well, I get hit with that bill, and if I come back with another heart attack, I can't be admitted into that same hospital. Or the hospital gets hit with fines, and I also get hit with fines. So the inflation rate is going to stay hopefully relatively low because of this, but it just means there's going to be higher costs. So I project, and Janet, thank you for the question, I project, we talk about it, is it's going to stay where Medicare is telling us, which is going to be about roughly 6 to 7%.
And Dan, I think it's 28 after. I think we're going to get 2 more questions, if that's all right.
Sure, I'm here all day.
Sure. We've got one that just came in here that is talking about the liability that the children of these boomers may have. You're laughing for some reason. That these children may have in dealing with a parent that hasn't planned for these health care problems.
I have no. I could imagine who asked that question out of everyone that's on there. So what's happening under the Affordable Care Act is they're expanding Medicaid. So under the expansion of Medicaid, people no longer have to hide their assets to get on Medicaid for the states that have accepted the expansion. All you need to do is have no income or have your income pointed towards health care. So you can get into a facility, give them your Social Security check, and state, I'm going to get on Medicaid. And if you have no assets, you throw them in a trust or whatever it may be. What's happening under state law, because of the federal law, under the Medicaid expansion, the Recovery Act has become stronger. So what that means is Medicaid, by law, is forcing each individual state to have to get the assets back from the person. They have to claw back that money. So what they do is they go after the estate. So what's been happening over years is the elder care attorneys and the financial advisors hide those assets, have it be through trusts or a spend down. Unfortunately, now some states have implemented what's called the filial support laws, meaning they can now go after the children of the parents that have basically hid the assets to get on Medicaid, and they're going to pass the bill on to the children. This has happened in Pennsylvania. A gentleman named John Pittis got hit with a $93,000 bill when his mother decided to jump ship from a Medicare a nursing facility and go back to Greece. And what's more frightening is the state that I live in New Hampshire, just passed a law that became effective January 2014, that this filial support law not only reaches to children, but it also impacts any professional that helps people hide their assets. So that means any financial advisor that helps the client or any elder care attorney that helps their client qualify for Medicaid, they're also liable for the cost of when Medicare claws back the expense. So I'm shocked that someone asked it, but I'm willing to bet I probably know who.
And I think this is, again, this is the last one, so thank you for that. Last question I've got in here is talking about the, can you explain how the mandatory Medicare requirement applies to a 66 or older individual who has registered for Medicare Part A, but is covered by spousal health insurance, but may want or need to start taking Social Security prior to age 70?
That's fine, as long as they have credible health insurance through an employer. They do not, that late enrollment penalty for Part B and Part D does not start. Once they're no longer covered by credible employee health insurance, which will probably happen in the next few years thanks to the Affordable Care Act, they have to enroll or face the late enrollment penalty. Just keep in mind, one side note, once you accept Medicare Part A, you can no longer place money into a health savings account. So that's one reason they may want to look at it. If they have insurance through an employer and if spouse's employer, you may not want to accept Medicare anyways. I hope I answered it correctly.
Absolutely, Dan. Well, thank you so much. I want to take a moment here. We've got our final slide in here. Again, the contact information. If you'd like information to get in touch with Dan or Jester Financial, please contact NAFA if you haven't caught the slides throughout today's presentation. But we want to take a quick moment again to thank all of our planners and all of the folks responsible for getting today's webinar together, not the least of which is NAFA's brand new partner, Jester Financial, for being here and providing this information. It's the first time I've been with NAFA for 6 years, and it's the first time that we've done a webinar of this nature on the health insurance and the healthcare issues. So glad to be able to provide that out there. So thank you again to our Education Committee, the National Retirement Planning Coalition, many of our members and members of that coalition who have forwarded information about today's webinar on. Again, great benefits are available for members who log in at NAFA.com, and today's webinar will also be available for replay at NAFA.com later this afternoon or early tomorrow. We are having another webinar this Thursday entitled Suitably Using Annuities in Charitable Planning, and we'll be joined by NAFA member Legacy Tree Financial for that presentation. And again, Dan, thank you so very much for your time. Thanks to Insurance Insight Group for hosting today's webinar.
Thank you, Scott, for allowing me, and thank you, everybody, for